Australia's system of compulsory voting is actually fairly unique in the world. Many places don't have compulsory voting, and many places just don't have voting. You get the government you get. You don't like it, sucks to be you. The way that we got compulsory voting is fairly interesting though. The first state to make it mandatory to vote in state elections was Queensland, and seeing the success that they had in making people show up to the polls, it became federally necessary about 1923. Australia's system of mandatory voting is actually fairly unique in the world. For many democracies, it's vote if you feel like it, and for others, there's no voting at all. You get the government you get. You don't like it, sucks to be you. But the way we got the mandatory system is actually really interesting. It started with Queensland, which made it mandatory for voting in state elections. This led to such a successful uptick that it was considered an appropriate move to do it federally, and I think in 1924, we amended the Act to make it mandatory to vote in federal elections. Almost every state makes it mandatory for you to vote in the state election and in the federal election, although state by state varies as to whether you need to do it in your local election. Now, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Let's talk about the arguments why it's probably a bad thing. The first logical conclusion is it's probably unnecessary for people who don't want anything to do with the process to end up having to vote. After all, they don't want to be there. They're basically forced to do it under threat of some sort of penalty, and that's not nice nor necessary. The problem with any sort of force being necessary to lead to the legitimate use of government power is also something problematic, and that's something that should really be considered. But let's talk about why it might be possibly a good thing. Firstly, the reality is that by forcing everyone to vote, you don't get over-characterization through one specific segment of the population. This is very common in other countries, whereby you'll have voters that turn out substantially from one racial or ethnic demographic, or they turn out from a specific age demographic. And generally speaking, their politicians over-report and over-service that one cross-section of the population. The other thing about making it mandatory is that you ensure at least that everyone's vote is heard. Even if that vote is particularly uneducated or unconcerned, at least they have a say in the democratic process, and you can't arbitrarily stop them from. And finally, as all of us have our lives governed by the government, whether we like it or not, it's probably sensible to make sure that we all have a say in how that runs. So while I concede it can be somewhat annoying to force people to show up and vote for key issues, I think it's better than the alternative. The alternative being that you have a government that's really run by a small cross-section of society and for a small cross-section's benefit. And finally, it makes people care about the process. If you really don't like the people that are running, you can run yourself, or you can find a candidate that aligns with your views. The worst thing you can do is donkey voting, which is when you throw your vote away, basically drawing a picture on the form or doing something else stupid. Hopefully that explains why compulsory voting isn't necessarily such a bad thing. Follow me for more legal TikTok.